The High Seas Treaty was created back in early 2023. It was a huge feat to actually put this thing together and say, hey, we actually have a plan to go forth and protect any ocean beyond the exclusive economic zone of each country, which contains most of the ocean. And now it's been signed by over 80 countries, which is huge. I still need more countries, but 80 countries, we'll start off with that, and that will be okay for now. But now, what do we do next? What is next in the process of the High Seas Treaty to get the high seas protected? That's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean. And we're going to be talking collectively as a planet of what we can do to live for a better ocean in respect to the High Seas Treaty that was signed or really come up with or agreed upon back in, I believe it was March, April, or May of 2023. It was a huge feat. I remember watching the video of the sort of the final gavel put down saying the High Seas Treaty is in play. Now we're just going to wait for countries to sign it. I remember, scientists and conservationists and world leaders sort of crying, as some of them are crying as they've been working on this High Seas Treaty for quite a long time. This is not something you come up with in January of 2023 and sign in a few months after that. No, this is something that's been worked on for a number of years. For many of the people who've been a part of this have been asking for a High Seas Treaty or something to protect the high seas for decades. And so now we finally have it. It was an emotional time. Now the next step after that was let's get countries to ratify it. Let's get countries to sign on saying, hey, you know what? This is what we're going to do. We agreed upon this. We helped put this together. We are going to put this in place. Well, that's great. They signed on. Now what? Now, what do we do? And I found this great article that I'll link to in the show notes from the Global Ocean Observing System, which is a UN sort of global ocean observing system, I believe. It's an organization anyway. So what it is essentially, it's an organization. Let's just see who they are. Let's just to make sure I know for sure. It is, it's an Intergovernmental Oceanic Commission-led program, so the IOC, and it's part of UNESCO. So this is a big plan that's part of a big organization that's part of UNESCO, it's part of the UN. And so what they are doing is they put an article forth, and on October 26th, of this year, 2023, they actually put forth an article to say, hey, you know what we need to do? We know the next steps. This is the next steps. And really it comes down to let's get more data, but they put in a much better structure to find out what's next in sort of the big thing for the high seas. What do we need to do? So they go over, hey, we came up with a treaty, a high seas treaty, and so that's great. It's also known as the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, the BBNJ, and it's a part of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, on the Convention and Sustainable Use of Marine Biological Diversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction, or the BBNJ agreement. So I'm just going to warn you right off the bat, there are going to be a lot of acronyms in this article and in this episode. I apologize for it. The UNESCO, the UN, the IOC, they're all notorious, and scientists in general are all notorious for acronyms. People trying to be smart with the acronyms, they love their acronyms. It's very difficult to explain what goes on in science to the public because there are so many acronyms. It's part of the jargon that we talk about when we talk about science communication and trying to put it in terms that are good. And so that's what I'm going to do. So the Global Ocean Observing System is known as, I think it's JOS or GOS or Goose. I think it's Goose, GOOS. I'm going to say Goose. And it plays a critical role. But essentially what they need to do is we need to gather data. That's the big thing. High seas is a large place, not only from a surface area, but it's also from looking at the depth of the ocean. When we talk about comparing land conservation to marine conservation, land conservation is really in 2D, right? You have the land and you have up. With the ocean, it's 3D, right? You have the surface, you have just below the surface, and you have the depth, right? So there's a bit of a 3D component in there. And so we need to find out a lot about not only the surface of the ocean, not only the first 200 meters of the ocean, but beyond the first 200 meters of the ocean and all the way to the depths. That's a large area, a large volume to be able to cover and find out as much information as possible to put together sort of the three main components of the agreement. And it relates to the three components relate to marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, and genetic resources. So we talked about last episode about marine protected areas and what they are. Essentially, it's a boundary of area within the ocean that covers the surface and below the surface that is essentially put in place to prevent extractive purposes. So anything that deals, or extractive activities. So anything that deals with oil and gas extraction, deep sea mining or mining of any sort, extractive purpose activities such as fishing and so forth, right? So there's a lot of these different things. Now, environmental impact assessments, when a development happens or something that's going into play within a particular piece of the ocean, or that may or may not affect a particular piece of the ocean, whether it be a coastline or open ocean, it doesn't matter. There's an environmental impact assessment. A lot of times done when industry's involved. I've been a part of these in Canada, where there's an entire sort of like environmental assessment division of Canada in the department of one of the departments in Canada, and that's a big department, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on with oil and gas, with mining, with any kind of like fishing, any kind of shipping lanes and things like that. Anything that has to do that could pollute or affect the environment, there is an environmental impact assessment, or an EIA. Remember those acronyms. So environmental impact assessment is one of those things where essentially you look at what's going to be put in place, and then you say, okay, what could this harm all the way around it? Is it too harmful for this thing to go into place, or is it okay that we can put it into place and not have too much environmental damage? Unfortunately, with a lot of that, you can put environmental damage in there if you pay for something else to be fixed in the environment. So there's also that. There's a lot of stuff that goes in environmental impact assessment. I should have a whole episode dedicated towards that, and I might in the future. And of course, genetic resources are just, we need to know about the genetics of the ocean. We need to know about genetics of species. We need to know the genetics of habitats. We need to know the genetics of ecosystems. And that's really what it comes down to. It's information. And so this is something that is going to be the focus on. But in everything, we need to, in all three of these components, we need to know what we are protecting in the first place, or having an impact assessment on, or genetic material, and to monitor it through time in order to know if the MPA or any kind of impact assessment is going to be useful, right? That's what we really need to know. So the key thing is we need to have these EOVs, again, these acronyms, the essential ocean variables that will come. They are going to be key biological, physical, and biogeochemical measurements to monitor and track the state of the ocean and its variability. This will be in the high seas area, right? So under this framework, there's a comprehensive set of 12 essential ocean variables dedicated to biodiversity, from microbes and phytoplankton to seabirds and marine mammals. This is the foundation of a fit-for-purpose ocean observing system to support the BBNJ agreement. So that BBNJ is the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So really what it comes down to when we talk about biodiversity, if we protect biodiversity, in theory, we are protecting the planet. We are protecting things from changing. And this is not biodiversity in terms of how many species we have. That includes that. But how many habitats, how many types of different species, types of populations, communities, ecosystems, all this stuff has to do with biodiversity. Genetic material, all this stuff has to do with genetic biodiversity, or genetic materials, or biodiversity in general. Okay? So now we have all this stuff. What do we do with it? How do we collect? What are we going to do with all this information? How do we make it accessible to everything, right? There are a lot of disconnected programs out there that are trying to gather data on a variety of different things, whether it's deep sea, whether it's the first 200 meters, whether it's fish, whether it's phytoplankton, zooplankton, bacterial microbes, marine mammals, seabirds. There's all this different types of information from people in academia, people in governments, people in conservation organizations, individuals, citizen science groups. There's all this different types of information that are being collected. And it's not necessarily a breadth of information that's required. We still require a lot more information. So there's going to be a lot more investment into research. That's one thing this treaty does. it starts the ball rolling on justification for the research that will go on to gather all this information, the observing system. So we're going to see a lot more buoys out in the high seas, I would imagine. We're going to see a lot more information, a lot more surveys in the high seas, whether it be marine mammal surveys or bird surveys, or we're going to see a lot more collection of data, a lot more investment in gathering data. Now, still going to take a ton of time, not enough time to protect 30 by 30, but we're still going to be building that information. We can make predictions from the information that we have to try and make predictions elsewhere in similar habitats, similar areas, similar ecosystems. It won't be perfect, but it'll be better. But the biggest thing is making sure that the data is accessible. So accessible observations to meet the diverse needs. So essentially ensuring that these essential ocean variables observations are fair. And that's another acronym: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So essentially, can everybody use them and get access to them? And if we can reach those that need them is part of the Goose core mission, which is making sure that the observing system is accessible to all. So this is done in close collaboration with the Ocean Biodiversity Information System, which is OBIS. Now, I've talked about GIS before. This is like a global GIS database, and it's a mapping database. You can actually go online to OBIS, and I'll probably put a link to it in the show notes. You can go online to OBIS, and you can check out any data on pretty much any species that is well known or studied or researched, and it'll be in there. A lot of researchers and conservation organizations will add their data once they're done with it. They'll add their data to the system, and people can search on that. And then people have done actual surveys, and they've done research papers based on that information. It's been quite valuable through time. So that will be the platform that we're going to go with. And I think it says new discoveries in mapping of marine life resources can be facilitated through collective and sustained observing efforts with the coordination facilitated by Goose and its members. This way, we can ensure that the marine life observations are accessible to all and therefore can be delivered into the BBNJ agreement framework and meet the diverse needs of nations. That was said by Gabrielle Canonico, co-chair of the Goose Biology and Ecosystems Expert Panel. So here we have this system. So we're going to collect the data. The data that's going to be collected is going to go into OBIS as part of this Goose sort of project. And so what we're going to do is we're going to see an influx of data into that system. There's already a ton of data into that system. And then we're going to be able to map out, and we're going to be able to map parts of the high seas and maybe put in more impact assessments, marine protected areas, and find out more genetic resources that we can see. So the coordination is going to come from Goose, right? It's all going to come from that. It's going to come from ocean observation networks, as well as at a national and regional scales through about 15 regional alliances and 76 Goose national focal points. So by delegating the Goose national focal point, each country can contribute to the global observing system and ensure communication between Goose and the National Ocean Observing Organizations. The coordination framework is key to the facilitating sharing of knowledge, capacity, and technology, contributing to the fourth key element of the BBNJ agreement, which focuses on capacity development and technology transfer. This is huge. I'm going to tell you why it's huge, because I've already started to see jobs being advertised by UNESCO to say we need somebody as part of this observing system. So we need to hire coordinators, we need to hire program directors, we need to hire program coordinators to be able to put all this together and be able to start the process on the High Seas Treaty. This is an important work that's going to be done for years to come. And it's going to be important to be able to get everything done, right? We want to get everything done and get it done right and make sure that it's accessible to all. So we're having a lot of people involved. Many of the countries are going to have their own people within those departments, within those governments and conservation organizations. There's going to be an influx of research from the governments that are participating in this to get things done, not only from a government level, but also from different conservation, different sort of conservation organizations and so forth, and academics to be able to come together and put this together. This is going to be important. This is going to be sort of what's going to be coming down the pipeline in the future. And I'm really happy to see this as it's an important part of protecting the ocean. It's an important part because it gives us optimism and gives us hope that we are actually doing something to protect the ocean, not just the ocean that is within our exclusive economic zone in Canada, in the US, in Mexico, in the UK, all over the world, in our EEZs, like our zones that each country controls, but beyond those zones into the high seas, where we need to provide more optimism. We need to provide more hope. We need more protected areas. We need more impact assessments on larger projects that have, at this point, have really gone on without any kind of barriers or anything like that, or any kind of management or oversight and enforcement, as well as we need more genetic resources. And that's what this article is all about. That's what this optimism is all about. And I, for one, am happy to see this coming out. And you should be happy too. And if you are, or you're not, or you're skeptical, as I was when I first saw the High Seas Treaty, let me know. You can contact me at How to Protect the Ocean, at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram, or you can email me, speakupforblue.com/contact. You fill out the form, it goes right to my email. I'd be happy to answer you when I can. As well, you could go on speakupforblue.com, the bottom right corner, there's a little microphone. You just click that, leave a voice message. I would love to hear your voice, and share this episode if you want somebody to feel hope for the ocean, to feel that we have optimism for the ocean and protecting the high seas. Just go into your app that you're listening to this, your favorite podcast app that you're listening to this podcast episode on, click the 3 dots beside the episode, click copy the link, and send it to your colleague, to your family, to your friends, whoever you'd like to send it to. I would like you to share that. They need it to hear about this. They need the optimism. They need the hope. We need to spread awareness. And that's it for today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.